Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, episode number 40 with Karl Turnlund. Just a really fascinating conversation with the variety of things that Karl has done and is into, and it's everything from his origins, working with his family, essentially with like showbirds, as somebody might do, like show dogs, up to, his work in residence life and higher ed, and his interest in Harry Potter, Star Wars, all sorts of geeky stuff like that. And then also, just stuff he did in school, and his interest in tarot cards and what that means to him, and what it means for others that he works with. So just a really broad array of stuff, but all really interesting. It's a great listen, and really happy that I get to share this conversation with you. So after this brief message from our sponsor, this is episode number 40 with Karl Turnlund. This episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast is brought to you by Top Hat, the teaching app that makes active learning come to life. Top Hat helps thousands of professors create their perfect course. Our app is easy to use and allows you to engage your class, adopt next-generation textbooks, and run tests, all within a secure digital environment. See why faculty in over 700 colleges and universities across North America trust Top Hat to power their classrooms. Visit tophat.com/higheredgeek. That's tophat.com/higheredgeek. Alrighty, so appreciate you taking some time out here to hang out for the show, and I think you are somebody who, when I put out the call for guests, just made sense. I know you're kind of a fellow geeky higher ed professional, and just folks in all their own ways that they sort of kind of represent that moniker, but. I'm really curious to hear more about your story and the things that you're into. So we'll go ahead and get right into it here. But if you just want to quickly introduce yourself and your professional journey and how you got to be where you are today.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, it's so cool to be on the show and to be able to talk about the things that I geek out about. The idea of being super interested in maybe a thing or a couple of things at a time has really kind of been a defining feature of both my personal and my professional life. So everything that you bring up in the episodes resonates in a really, really cool way. My professional journey, or my journey so far, actually started back in rural Minnesota, where I grew up. I grew up on an ornamental poultry hatchery, which means that we raised a whole slew of different chickens and peacocks and pigeons and geese, all these different kind of birds. And then I would participate in fairs, county fairs, those kinds of things, showing these birds, which was so, I think back and I'm like, that was a different lifetime. So crazy, such a weird thing. But it was one of the first things I ever truly geeked out about, because I wanted to know everything there was to know about these birds, where they came from, what made them the way that they were, how they were supposed to look according to different standards. It's kind of like a dog show, right? We all know, the American Kennel Club, Thanksgiving, the big, look at the poodle, look at the golden retriever. But for me, it was look at these chickens. So I actually can credit that in a little bit of way to my student affairs journey as well, because one of the first roles I ever had as what I would consider to be an educator was working as a mentor through my county's 4-H program. So I was teaching younger kids about the poultry project and how to show a chicken, which is so crazy, but so amazing. And when I wound up going to college, I was the first one in my family to go. I ended up being an education major, and I paired with that anthropology, because I've always kind of been really obsessed with the way that things connect to one another. And so in typical ed major fashion, I was in a bunch of different school settings and wound up really falling in love with the idea of being in a higher education setting. And the rest is kind of history: grad school, a couple different professional positions, some definite challenges there, which we can maybe discuss a little bit later on. But I'm currently in a role, a pretty traditional residence director role in an office of residence life at a small liberal arts college. I do a lot less educating about chickens these days, but it's still my go-to fun fact. So it's still living on.
If nothing else, go-to fun fact. But it's interesting sort of thread that you can kind of follow through. And Yeah, I think we all have that. I mean, maybe whether we're kind of a parent to it or not, um, yeah, like things that, sparked our interest, that at least maybe just ignited that passion for getting deeply into things. And maybe it's something that we've continued to be into. But I think that is just part of what, it's like a geeky, nerdy core is just, getting deeply into the things that we're into and just having a curiosity. So I guess, how is that maybe kind of manifested like during your college experience? Like, was there things that you were into then, that gave you something personally and or professionally that still resonates with you today?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was unique to my college experience, I think, was a program I did during my first 2 years while I was at the institution. I went to St. Olaf College, which is a small liberal arts school on a hill, very picturesque, small town kind of vibes, right? Shares a town actually with another small college, Carleton College, and all of this is in Minnesota. Our school didn't have an honors program, and I had sort of been intrigued with the idea of being in a very interdisciplinary study environment on purpose. And it kind of goes back to that idea of wanting to find connections between things, right? But I did this program that was called The Great Conversation. And the Great Con was a 5-course sequence that looked at basically the rise of Western philosophy. So we did everything from reading religious texts from the Greeks and the Hebrews all the way up through contemporary authors, philosophers, and we covered like architecture and a number of like science writings about different science philosophies and different arts. And oh my goodness, it was just so interdisciplinary. And I think that that's been the thing that has most helped me in a way, like learn how to learn. So then when I went to grad school for student affairs, the idea of connecting student development theories or organization theories or those kind of things and integrating them into practice or integrating them into my everyday life, it was second nature, because in The Great Conversation, we were literally trying to engender a conversation between the authors, many of whom have long passed, and our cohort. When we were moving through the course sequence, we moved through it together with the same group of students. And still friends with a lot of those folks. We still check in about people like Goethe or, Jane Austen. Like it's fun stuff, but it's also kind of like the thing that helped me, I think, like most efficiently geek out, like when you learn how to connect all of your varied interests to so many different things. Like I'm probably on my 6th playthrough of Skyrim, and I'm like, yo, I'm all down for this conversation about lore that's happening on Reddit, because I know what the parallels to some of these like really big philosophical undertones of Western philosophy have meant over time. So it definitely empowered me in so many different kind of ways, and it's definitely a hallmark of my own liberal arts experience.
Yeah, it's super unique and and super interesting. I think that is definitely like when you're like academically equipped to be like especially kind of geeky or nerdy of like that critical analytical lens that you can take to media and stuff, and it can just add that additional layer of enjoyment. Certainly try my best to do that myself. Kind of consume things with that critical perspective. I guess, transitioning that kind of brought you to, present day here. So what are some of the things that you really enjoy most about your current work?
Yeah, I think so. I was not somebody who ever intended to be in residence life for a long period of time. It has become a functional area home for sure. Within my current role, when I arrived here, I was coming off of a weird transitional period. So in student affairs, and particularly in some social media spaces, sometimes I think we are really great about talking about hardships that people experience in the field. Other times, maybe not so much. So in my first post-grad position, I was actually laid off. It was a institutional kind of budget reduction. There were a lot of things happening internally to the school, and our department took a really steep hit. And that was a really difficult transition. And I was working in residence life at the time. And it was one of those things where no one had equipped me to go through that kind of change, right? And then I landed in a property management position, which, a lot of people talk about life lessons and how they hit you when you least expect it. I didn't know I needed to know so much about public-private partnerships, but there I was in downtown Chicago, kind of like trying to get by, but learning so much about the private side of student housing. And that actually has come to benefit me in a big way as I kind of continue through the career. I wound up here at my current position because I was looking for something that was back in that higher education setting. But that whole journey has given me such a deep appreciation about what it means to combine, a more personal take on student development, or about, bringing your full self to the table when you're at the kind of conversations that often happen in residence life offices, with this idea of, even though I'm still at a very entry level point, like, we have some pretty good influence at this particular institution, and it's so empowering to know that that work is seen and that it's integrated into the student experience in such a big way. That's the thing I think that keeps me here, or at least keeps me coming back to residence life for now. Right now, I'm really focused on conduct in my role, which is not something that has been a focus in the past. It was usually more of the residential education in a more traditional, like working with programming models, doing assessment of that kind of thing. But I have really enjoyed the idea of being able to get into some of these really intensive conversations about things like decision making, and that should surprise no one at this point because of how, like, big picture thinking I am. So it's been a really cool challenge, really cool journey, and I very much appreciate the stability of my current role. I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, for sure. Because I know I've struggled with certain transitions, which I mean, kudos to you for handling a transition that was put upon you. But yeah, you graduate and that's coming, and you prepare for that and those sort of things. So even with that, I've struggled in those times and appreciate a good routine and knowing where stuff is, and just feeling kind of just kind of settled in. But and I guess going through a phase right now of really absorbing the value of the educational moments of conduct. That's certainly a good takeaway for sure, even just for the moment. And maybe you kind of are like, okay, I think I've, learned all that I want or can for now, and go on to a different aspect. But yeah, just really kind of deeply connecting with learning about that aspect of the work is it's very good stuff. But also good stuff and the fun stuff here. So if you want to kind of just segue here to the things that you geek out about currently, if you want to kind of just start sort of, thematically, things maybe that you've always been into or more recent discoveries, whatever is kind of top of mind for you. But, make sure to get into specific things that we can recommend a little bit later. But just kind of what's capturing your attention right now. And
I think if I think really big picture about the things that I geek about, they always involve really engrossing stories, right? Like these really amazing narratives that are complex, multifaceted. I've always been in love with Star Wars. I've also always been in love with Star Trek. I hold them both near and dear to my heart, equally as possible, depending on the season. One of my first role models actually was Deanna Troi. And it's no wonder that I get so engulfed in these empathetic conversations around conduct, because as the ship's counselor in The Next Generation, Counselor Troi was doing that work, right? And championing that a long time ago. So it's the complexity of those stories and the complexity of those characters that I think were the most sort of intriguing for me. And then later on, when I was, doing a lot more reading and that kind of thing, Harry Potter, of course, became such a big component. And that's actually made a recent comeback in my life because of a podcast called Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. So I wasn't a huge podcast listener for a while that was becoming a big thing. I didn't really have a commute to listen to those things during. And then when I started commuting, it was kind of a gift of time to be able to be on a train and to listen to all of these different kinds of podcasts that were doing some storytelling. But some of the podcasts like Harry Potter and the Sacred Text were taking texts that I already knew and making them feel so fresh and so new and so vibrant all over again. So that particular podcast is all about reading Harry Potter in a way that treats it as if it were sacred. So the hosts of the show apply sacred reading practices to chapters that they read through different theme lenses. And then each episode they go through and they talk about the overview of the chapter. They talk about personal anecdotes. They go through a number of different reading strategies, and they really delve into these themes in such a deep way that it does become so meaningful and so deeply transformative that it's just like, oh my gosh, it's like a new story. So that has been good. So yeah, the stories, the enrichment, the characters, all of those things really bring home, or at least bring out my I want to know everything, that feeling of I got to know more.
Mm-hmm.
I have to figure out where these characters have come from, how they interact with one another, what it means for me in my life here in my own context. That is the stuff that really gets my mind going.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So yeah, we'll definitely link out to that show. And well, I guess, you mentioned really with that podcast specifically was a good example, but like, I guess anything else generally, and you kind of got into it with like Star Trek too, just like when you think about these things that you've always been into, how do you see these hobbies and interests that you have like positively contributing to your life? It sounds like, Star Trek was role modeling, and Harry Potter and Secret Text is like helping you to think differently about things that are personally meaningful for you. So like if it's maybe like an anecdote or any other like thoughts like that about anything that you have, as a hobby or an interest that, how is it positively contributing to your life?
Yeah. So actually one of my, I guess I call it a hobby. One of the things I have recently become so enthralled in is reading tarot cards, which is like something I never really knew about. It just like sprung into my life randomly. My partner actually was the person who was like, hey, I have this deck of tarot cards. People tell the future with this, right? You should learn. And I remember seeing references to things like tarot cards across all of these different, shows, or you'd have like different like wise people would have all these different divination tools. And I got so interested in that theme of trying to discern kind of your present situation. Essentially what it is meaning making, right? So tarot cards, if you're not familiar, it's a deck of cards that historically have been used for card games and that kind of thing, and then made a transition during the spiritualist movement in like the early 1900s of becoming like a divination tool. So they're like really richly symbolic pictures that are sort of put on a different affiliations with different meanings based on things like alchemy or astronomy. Like it really depends on how you discern the cards, right? But thinking about all of these like positive messages and the way that stories work, the tarot brings together a bunch of symbolism that I had no idea was out there until I learned the deck. But it brings together a really cohesive story of kind of what a human experience might look like. And I think that's why I've gotten so intrigued with it, is because I can go through the deck and flip out a card and think about all of the different moments in my life where that card maybe has had an impact or could help me understand kind of what's going on now. Essentially, I use it like a reflective tool. But I have found such a vibrant community of people who use tarot in that way on Instagram. I've actually been able to connect with some other higher ed professionals through that, because they'll go on their stories and be like, hey, I'm at Admitted Students Day. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where do you work? And it's so cool that there are so many people now that are using the tarot as almost like a personal development tool. So I have an Instagram profile for it. I'm about to start reading for other folks. And it's just like such a beautiful moment of harmony between all of these different interests that I hold. It's a way to be helpful for myself and for others. It's also a great way to combine all of these different archetypes and stories. And one of the ways that I learned the cards was thinking about people like Counselor Deanna Troi or Princess Leia, or different characters from Avatar. Like all of these different archetypes show up for me as I think about these larger themes in my life. And they just happen to all fall in this one little deck of cards. So I think that's a great example of like sometimes things just show up in your world that help you understand your world in such a beautiful and more vibrant way. And for me, that's kind of been where I've been spending a lot of my time, is learning the cards and learning how they connect things that I love already.
Yeah, that's powerful. I mean, yeah, because I think that's a good explanation of sort of how they fit in. Because I'm not like I know of them, but I'm not super familiar with yeah, I guess how people use them necessarily. And yeah, I mean, we're all just trying to make meaning of our world, and
Right.
yeah. I mean, for me, it's always kind of just been that simple like karma formula. Like you put good energy out there, and it comes back to you. So just always trying to do the right thing, and but yeah, it's like if you get into like having somebody, yeah, almost like being able to talk to you about what's going on, and like kind of process that
Hmm.
way or something, and like almost get out of your own head about it. But yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and yeah, I'm sure it'll be cool as you connect with more folks on that and do readings and such. But
Yeah.
well, I guess yeah, I mean, related to anything that you've already mentioned or anything else that comes to mind. So anything specifically that you are reading, watching, and or listening to, it could be any of those categories or all of those categories. Anything that you want to just kind of give a tip of the hat to, and yeah, just so we can include in the show notes.
Yeah. So I am actually rereading an incredible book called Becoming Wise. Becoming Wise is authored by Krista Tippett, who is the sort of force behind the podcast On Being, which is another thing that I highly recommend. It's an interdisciplinary look at basically the human experience from multiple perspectives, a lot of different levels. But in Krista's book, she brings together a number of themes that she's experienced during her journalism career and during this podcast that she's really championed. And it is just such a beautiful book of like solid life lessons, but it's presented in a way that's very narrative friendly, which I appreciate. Other podcasts I'm listening to right now, besides Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, are The Memory Palace by Nate DeMeo. It's such a beautiful, poignant storytelling podcast, and it just captures these moments of essentially memory, but in a way that is just so beautiful. And they're short episodes, easy to take in, but they're just beautiful. And then the other big one that I've been listening to recently is Lore, which is Aaron Mahnke's exploration of folklore. Aaron does such an incredible job of connecting these sometimes like super frightful stories back to like common things that we all experience, things like fear or things like, wanting a sense of belonging, that kind of stuff. And I learned so much about storytelling in the world through his podcast. I really, really love it.
Yeah, yeah. My wife listens to lore a lot, so like sometimes we're like riding together in the car. Yeah, I've heard a few episodes, and they are very well done. And we watched the Amazon series as
Yep.
well, which is I think a little more up my alley. Like being able to visualize it, like made it even
Yeah.
that much more powerful. So yeah, really good stuff. Well, then we will wrap up here as we always do. So if you want to just kind of end on an optimistic note with anything or things that you are looking forward to in your job, life, and or the world. So again, any or all of those categories there, just yeah, anything that you're looking forward to.
Yeah. So, of course, we're in the summer season. So for residence life, we are really getting into the zone for RH rating and things like that. And that's always an exciting time. Everybody's coming back with such beautifully refreshed energy. For all of us that were on contract over the summer, we're maybe a little less refreshed, but still really excited. So that's always nice. I think in terms of some of the other stuff, I'm super excited to be still continuing to grow my tarot card journey, I guess. I don't know. I'm about to launch a website and, like I said, start doing readings for others. And it's something that has been just such a wonderful kind of side project for a while now that yeah, I'm just excited that, well, first of all, I'm excited that I've stuck with it because I cycle through my interests pretty quickly. I'm going through, reread of Harry Potter and then I jump into something new, or I'll max out on these podcasts and I'll jump into something else. But tarot, I think, because of the nature of what it is, has stuck with me for a while now. So that's really exciting. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I'm really excited about all of the ongoing conversations that are happening with the Star Wars franchise right now. And I don't want to, of course, we don't want to like delve all the way into that, but I think it's so cool that there are now sort of cross demographic conversations happening. I'm not a big Reddit user, but I love following the Star Wars stuff that goes on there. I love the clash of the fan base. It's so intriguing to me, especially as somebody who like grew up with it, but grew up thinking about Star Wars, I think, in not so many of the ways that some of the more traditional older fans may have. So I'm just so excited about that and very intrigued to see where that franchise will go moving forward.
Yeah. I think it seems like it comes up every once in a while on the podcast, and it's like to try and like temper myself to not, going too long of a tangent. But yeah, I think,
right.
I think it's going in the right direction, and I think these are good conversations to have. I think The Last Jedi was like almost so meta about letting the past die, and like, I need to rewatch it again just to like, you watch it the first time, you're almost like paying too much attention to maybe the things that are just like flashy in front of you. It's like you rewatch it, you can almost, take your time with it a little bit more. But because I watched Solo too, and it was like just such a good like straightforward movie, like that had some good twists, but it was just like, I want more just like good Star Wars movies, just like with all the Marvel movies. It's like some of them are just like good. They don't have to be like the most epic, like universe shattering movies of all time. Right. It's like Ant-Man and the Wasp was just like a fun romp, and like, again, as the pun intended, is like smaller in scale. Like, like it just, the way that they do their stories is different than the rest of the MCU and stuff. And it's like, that's good. So yeah, it's a lot of interesting stuff. Yeah. Happening in those communities and stuff. But, and I mean, specifically with the tarot stuff, it sounds like, like that's one of those like creative hobbies that I feel like everybody needs in some capacity. And sometimes it's stuff you do just for yourself, and sometimes it's stuff that you're going to put out into the world. And other times it's like stuff you're going to put out into the world and try to like build up into, a sort of profitable venture. And, sometimes it's like, no, I don't need it to be that. I don't want it to be that. And I just want to, connect with people about the things that I'm into and just create and do it for creating's sake, or, just like, sounds like maybe, at least for now, it's like, I just want to do this for the sake of doing it and connect with people. And like you said, it's like meaningful to you in the sense that it's like something that you've continued to do for a long time. And like podcasting has been one of those things for me, or like playing video games. Like if I don't play video games for a while, I start to realize, it's like subconscious where it's like, oh, you know what? I haven't gamed in a while. And I've like literally played video games my entire life, and like try to keep that as a connection with like my brother, because we always played video games together. So, it's like I take it for granted sometimes. So I've been making time for when I want to make time for lately, and it's definitely one of the things that has been necessary to make more time for me. So I'm glad that you are also making time for the things that are bringing you joy lately. So all great stuff. We'll link out to everything that we talked about in this episode down in the show notes as usual. But really appreciate your time, Karl, and all that you shared. And just a really fascinating story, all the way from ornamental chickens to tarot card reading. So
there it is.
Yeah, it's I don't think anybody else will come close to just that breadth of things that is all part of your story. So really cool stuff. And again, just appreciate your time. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Of course. Thank you for letting me be on and for sharing that wonderful and strange breadth of experience.
Yes. It was awesome. And just have a good rest of your night.
You too.
This podcast is a proud member of the Connect EDU podcast network, bringing together diverse voices and thoughtful discussions to the higher ed community. Check us out online at connectedu.network or on Twitter at connectedupod. Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.